When Maggie Holloway removed her wedding ring and gently placed it into the velvet pouch, it felt as though she was letting go of a piece of her soul. That gold band had been a silent witness to more than 4 decades of happiness with her late husband, Richard, a symbol of love and steadfast companionship. But now, like the silver hair she had temporarily dyed brown, it too had to be hidden. This mission demanded complete anonymity. "You sure about this, Maggie?" Frank Martinez asked hesitantly as he set his coffee cup down. Legal documents were spread across the worn wooden kitchen table, bathed in the soft morning light that made the air feel unusually heavy. Frank had been her attorney for over 30 years. He had witnessed Holloway's Diner rise from a run-down roadside eatery to a beloved chain of 12 restaurants across the region. But there was one side of Maggie he had never seen before. The steely resolve hidden beneath her gentle, grandmotherly demeanor. "The will gives you full authority to oversee and, if necessary, remove Trevor. You don't have to go through all this undercover drama." Maggie quietly smoothed the employment paperwork from the staffing agency. Her hands trembled slightly, a sign of the arthritis that had begun to claim her joints. But her eyes, hidden behind dime store reading glasses, deliberately chosen instead of her usual designer frames, still gleamed with sharp clarity. "Paperwork only shows you the numbers," she murmured. "But how someone treats the people they think are beneath them, that reveals their true character." 3 months after Richard's funeral, the first email had arrived. A long-time customer complained about rude service, something that had never happened under Richard's management. Then came a tearful call from Doris, the veteran waitress who'd retired the previous year. "Something's wrong, Maggie. Staff are quitting left and right. They're too scared to talk, but things are going downhill fast." Holloway's Diner had never just been a restaurant. It was the couple's life's work, built with love, sleepless nights, and recipes tested and retested hundreds of times. After Richard passed away from cancer, interim control had been handed to Trevor, their charming, business degree-holding nephew, who had once worked a summer at the flagship location. On paper, he was perfect, but that perfect picture had started to unravel far too quickly. The financial investigation shows some irregularities, but nothing concrete enough to press charges, Frank reminded her, tapping a thick folder. "If I walk in as myself, Trevor will just put on a show for as long as I'm there," Maggie replied as she stood and walked to the window overlooking the garden Richard had lovingly tended. The dahlias he once prized had wilted under the frost. "No, I need to see the truth. When no one's pretending." Not even Frank could fully grasp the unease that had taken hold of her since reading that quarterly report. Staff turnover had spiked from 15% to 68% in just 6 months. Customer complaints were on the rise, yet food costs had somehow dropped. A deeply troubling contradiction. And the charitable programs Richard had championed, senior breakfasts, community fundraisers, all abruptly discontinued under the excuse of strategic restructuring. "Maggie Wilson?" she practiced aloud, invoking her maiden name. "Part-time waitress, worked at a few local diners in Durham." Frank sighed. He knew her too well. This was the same woman who raised 3 children on her own while building a business empire from scratch. Her grit was immovable. "The backstory is airtight," he admitted. "But Maggie, if anything happens, I'm not asking for permission," she said softly, yet firmly. "I'm asking for your support. Like always." He nodded, albeit reluctantly. "Just 1 month, right? 4 weeks to see if Trevor really deserves what Richard wanted to leave him." After Frank left, Maggie opened the cedar chest where she kept Richard's favorite sweater. The scent had faded with time, but as she pressed the soft fabric to her face, memories of her partner returned like a wave to her chest. Her breath caught. In the dim room, she whispered, "Am I crazy for doing this?" In her mind, she could almost hear his warm, rumbling chuckle, the sound that always preceded his favorite piece of advice. "Trust, but verify. And always watch how someone treats the waitstaff. The next morning, Maggie parked 3 blocks away from the original diner location. It wasn't just their first restaurant. It was the heart of everything they had built. The once bright red awning had faded, the windows cloudier than she remembered. Inside her purse, along with the fabricated resume and backstory she had memorized, sat a small notebook and a modern miracle. Her digital recording pen, a device her grandson had taught her to use. "Just double-click it before you start writing, Grandma," he'd explained, blissfully unaware of her true intentions. "It'll record everything." As Maggie approached the window, she froze. Inside, she saw Trevor Cohen, her nephew, once a bright-oiled college kid she had held in her arms, chatting animatedly with a young, attractive woman. Her name tag read Assistant Manager. Trevor's designer watch gleamed under the lights, his gestures wide, his smile showy. Behind them, a middle-aged waitress rushed by, her face tight with exhaustion. For a moment, Maggie wondered if she was overreacting. Maybe this was just the growing pains of a new leadership era. But then her gaze drifted toward the back lot. Pete, the longtime gardener who had worked with them for over 20 years, was collecting trash that had spilled from an overstuffed dumpster. His movements were slow, hindered by rheumatism. Richard had always made sure to accommodate him, adjusting his duties and hours with care and respect. Suddenly, Trevor emerged from the side door and shouted something at Pete. The old man recoiled, visibly flinching. Trevor stormed back inside, leaving Pete standing there. Shoulders slumped, pain and humiliation etched across his face. Maggie's heart broke. That was the moment every doubt dissolved. This wasn't just business, it was family, a community, and someone was tearing it down brick by brick with cold indifference. She adjusted her frumpy blouse, deliberately chosen to avoid attention, and smoothed her gray-dyed hair. Taking a deep breath, she let go of every ounce of corporate poise, stripped away the confident posture that had once carried her through countless boardrooms and investor meetings. In its place, she adopted the tentative demeanor of a forgotten senior, grateful for even the smallest job opportunity. 4 weeks, she reminded herself. Just 4 weeks. Not as Maggie Holloway, powerful founder, but as Margaret Wilson, an overlooked elderly woman looking for part-time work. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside. The very same bell Richard had insisted on keeping through every renovation, because to him it always meant welcome. But today it sounded more like a warning bell. The first thing that hit Maggie was the smell. Burnt grease, stale coffee, and a faint trace of cinnamon. Scents that had once warmed the soul now felt harsher, colder. Outside, winter bit at the windows. But in here, within the walls of what had once been their shared dream, it was colder still. The once sacred holy trinity of diner aromas, grease, coffee, and cinnamon, still lingered, but sharper now, stripped of the homey comfort she had worked so hard to cultivate. The soul had been scrubbed clean in favor of sterility. The morning rush enveloped her in a whirlwind of disconnection. Customers hunched over their phones instead of chatting. Staff moved like machines, frantic and impersonal. Gone was the easy rhythm of hospitality she had taught for decades. Everything now was mechanical, detached, as though the humanity had been vacuum-sealed and discarded, just like the laminated menus that had disappeared. "Can I help you?" A flat voice rang out. The young woman at the reception desk, barely in her 20s, didn't even glance up from her phone. Her name tag read Brittany, and her expression made it clear helping people was not on her list of favorite things. "And Margaret Wilson," Maggie said politely. "The staffing agency sent me. Today's my first day." Brittany looked up briefly, then offered a half-smile laced with thinly veiled surprise and a hint of condescension. "Oh, right. Wait here." She disappeared into the back, From the kitchen, Maggie could hear giggling mixed with the clatter of dishes, and then Trevor walked out. Trevor, her nephew, was almost unrecognizable now. 6 months after Richard's funeral, his once athletic frame had softened, and his designer shirt strained at the buttons. The charming smile that used to win over banks and investors now looked cold and mechanical, a shell of the charisma it used to be. "Miss Wilson, is it?" Trevor extended his hand, the handshake limp and calculated. "The agency didn't mention they were sending us someone with so much experience." He paused deliberately, leaving the implication hanging. Behind him appeared the young woman Maggie had seen earlier, Roxanne, the assistant manager, eyeing Maggie with undisguised skepticism. "This is Roxanne Winters, our assistant manager. Roxy, show Miss Wilson the ropes. Start her on tables 9 through 12, the back section." Roxy raised a brow. "Shouldn't we ease her in with something a little easier?" Trevor's smile turned tight. "I'm sure Miss Wilson appreciates us not underestimating her abilities." In truth, tables 9 through 12 were the restaurant's equivalent of Siberia, next to the restrooms and kitchen, where the constant slam of swinging doors created a rhythm of endless distraction. Roxy's training was rushed, brushing over key information without explanation. As Maggie quietly absorbed the details, she quickly noticed how thoroughly Trevor had dismantled the systems she and Richard had built. The detailed training manuals were gone. The mentor system for new hires eliminated. Even small signs listing ingredients essential for allergy awareness had vanished. Everything had been stripped down to a cold, detached minimum. "The menu's pretty basic," Roxy said, handing her an oil-stained apron. "Just don't let the kitchen rush you into taking orders before you're ready. The new chef, Victor? He's intense." "Victor?" Maggie blurted out before she could stop herself. "What happened to Eduardo?" Roxy's expression instantly changed, suspicious now. "You know someone who used to work here?" Maggie hesitated. "A rookie mistake. My neighbor's daughter worked here last year. She mentioned a chef named Eduardo. Got poached by some organic place." Roxy shrugged. "Victor's got Michelin experience." What Roxy didn't say, but Maggie quickly discovered, was that Victor's experience seemed limited to yelling and finger-pointing. The kitchen, once Richard's pride, had become chaotic and unsafe. Tools were scattered, ingredients unlabeled, and cleaning protocols ignored or outright skipped. "Order up for table 11, Victor barked, shoving a plate onto the path. The burger, meant to be medium, was charred black on one side. "This isn't..." Maggie began. "You want the customer to wait longer," Victor snapped. "Take it." A few minutes later, Maggie returned with the plate, rejected by the guest. Trevor intercepted her. "Problem?" he asked, as if customer complaints were unheard of. "Medium. This is burnt." "I'll take care of it," Trevor said, grabbing the plate. "Why don't you focus on turning your tables? Section 5 is backed up." By lunchtime, Maggie's feet throbbed a familiar pain from her early days, but now sharper with age. As she refilled salt and pepper shakers at the service station, she overheard 2 young servers nearby. "See the new old lady?" One of them snickered. $10 says she doesn't last the week. "Want to make it a pool?" The other replied. "I give her 3 days before she drops a tray or has a senior moment." Maggie didn't react. She logged it in her mind, not as an insult but as a symptom. These girls weren't inherently cruel. They were products of a toxic environment shaped by leadership that was cold and inhumane. After the lunch rush, Roxy handed Maggie a mop and bucket. "Table 7 had a spill. You're the newest, so it's yours." Her voice lacked even a trace of civility. Maggie accepted the tools without complaint. From a corner booth, an older server paused her cleaning and watched silently, a mix of sympathy and unease in her gaze. After mopping, Maggie was assigned even more grueling tasks: scrubbing the grease trap, descaling the industrial coffee machine, reorganizing the walk-in freezer, while struggling with a jammed freezer drawer. Trevor appeared. "Look at you. Take an initiative, Margaret," he said, his smile fake and razor-thin. "Good job." Then he handed her a labor report. "Your lunch sales were a little low, so we're cutting your floor hours tomorrow. You'll be on prep instead." The coldness in his tone confirmed everything Maggie had feared. This wasn't incompetence. It was calculated humiliation, a strategy designed to weed out employees who couldn't be easily manipulated or exploited. Each piece of Trevor's leadership style was crafted to control through fear, isolate through indifference, and crush morale through silent cruelty. At the end of the shift, Maggie noticed the older server, the one who had watched her earlier, waiting near the time clock. "I'm Sarah," the woman said softly, extending a hand with genuine warmth. "I'm sorry about today. It wasn't always like this." The unexpected kindness nearly broke Maggie's composure. She smiled, grateful. "Thank you, Sarah. They do this to everyone new," Sarah continued, lowering her voice. "Especially," she hesitated, "the older ones." Maggie finished for her. Sarah nodded. "Trevor calls it stress testing. If you survive a week, it gets a little easier." Maggie signed out. As she turned to leave, Trevor emerged from his office, arm casually draped around Roxy's waist, his hand sliding lower than it should. Roxy giggled, casting a mocking glance towards Sarah and Maggie. "See you bright and early, Margaret," Trevor called with a grin. 6 a.m. sharp. Prep starts before the sun. Back in her car, Maggie finally allowed her exhaustion to show. She clicked her recording pen twice to save the day's events, then rubbed her aching wrist. If this was just day one, what else would the next 3 weeks uncover? The more painful question lingered. How had Trevor, the boy Richard once believed in so completely, become this? Trevor used to be ambitious but kind, a natural leader with sharp edges. Now he was something else entirely, cold, calculated, and oblivious to the pain of others. As Maggie drove out of the parking lot, she spotted Sarah hurrying toward her old, beat-up Honda. In that moment, Maggie realized her mission might not be just about evaluating Trevor's fitness to inherit. Maybe she needed to be a witness for all the people being quietly crushed inside this place. The next morning, at 5:45 a.m., Maggie stood alone in the freezing dark of the back parking lot. The security lights Richard had once installed, after a female employee was harassed years ago, were now out. Either the bulbs had burned out, or someone had chosen not to replace them. At 6:10, a worn delivery truck crawled into the lot. A large man with a scruffy beard stepped out, keys jingling in his hand. "You the new prep lady?" he asked, his Eastern European accent heavy, but his tone not unfriendly. "I'm Emil. I handle supply runs. Trevor's always late." As Emil unlocked the back door, a rancid smell wafted from the walk-in cooler, tightening Maggie's stomach. "Cooler's broken again," Emil said with a shrug. "Victor says it's fine." "I don't think so." The morning prep list was scribbled hastily on a whiteboard. Chop vegetables, portion meat, mix pancake batter. All familiar. But what shocked Maggie were the shortcuts Emil casually shared. Lettuce going limp, ice water and a drop of bleach, just one. Meat smells off, soak in vinegar, then spice it up. Sour milk, bit of baking soda will fix it. Maggie's horror must have shown on her face. "Just temporary," Emil said quickly, "until vendor replaces, but Victor never calls. Trevor says it's smart business." He tapped his temple. By 7 o'clock, Victor arrived reeking of cigarettes and aftershave. He barely acknowledged Maggie, eyes glued to his phone as he barked at the staff. When Maggie asked about the cleaning protocol manual, once a sacred standard under Richard, Victor laughed. "Health inspections not for 3 weeks. We clean when they come, not before." From her prep station, Maggie had a perfect view of the kitchen in action. Once a symphony under Eduardo, now pure chaos. Raw chicken stacked above ready-to-eat foods, storage temperatures ignored, Cross-contamination rampant. Worse were the conversations. Table 6 asked about gluten again. Jason, a young server, groaned. I told them everything's fine, not worth the hassle of checking. Smart. Victor nodded. What they don't know won't kill them, probably. At 11 a.m., Maggie was startled by a commotion in the dry storage room. A young Latina woman, barely 20, ran out crying. Trevor followed close behind, his hand resting far too low on her back. Let's consider the matter closed, Lucia, he said, his voice dripping with fake kindness. But remember, scheduled favors come with certain expectations. Lucia nodded, wiping her tears as she returned to her station. When she passed Maggie, the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. During her break, Maggie used the staff restroom. Through the thin walls, she overheard voices from the employee lounge. Roxy and another staff member. Can't believe he's got his hands in everything, Roxy said. 3 locations already cleaned out before the inventory audit. What about payroll? The other voice asked. My check was short 40 hours last month, Roxy replied flatly. System glitch. And who's going to complain? Trevor handles all the HR reports. His uncle signs everything without reading. Uncle? Maggie froze. Thomas, Richard's brother, was the company's financial controller. He'd only been given the job out of family obligation, not competence. Was he involved too? That evening, as Maggie scrubbed the walk-in fridge, a job no one else offered to help with, Lucia quietly approached. You should be careful, she whispered. They don't like questions. I was just organizing, Maggie replied gently. Some of the dates were not about that, Lucia cut in, glancing around nervously. About anything. Jenny asked why tips were low last month. Next day, her register was short $200. Trevor said there was video of her stealing. She swore she didn't do it. Before Maggie could respond, Roxy appeared. Eyes narrowed. Lucia. Table 12's waiting on drinks. Margaret, men's room needs attention. Someone got creative in there. Lucia hurried off. Roxy lingered. Making friends already? How sweet. Just trying to learn the system, Maggie replied evenly. Then let me make it simple, Roxy said, stepping closer. Her perfume was overpowering in the small space. The last 3 people in your position didn't last a week. The 4th one, she didn't finish the sentence. Her smile turned cold, just enough to hide the threat behind it. Maggie understood instantly. Some things are better left unseen. No raised voice, no pointed stare. Just Roxy's presence, her casual dominance, was enough to turn the air heavy. As Maggie scrubbed the men's bathroom, now defiled as a sick joke by some nameless customer, her recording pen in her apron pocket continued to capture everything. Every word, every moment. A silent witness. Inside her mind, the puzzle pieces began to connect. This wasn't just mismanagement or cost-cutting. It was a calculated dismantling. Trevor was draining the lifeblood from Holloway's diner. Inventory fraud, doctored reports, driving employees into fear or silence. But why? The answer came unexpectedly. While taking out the bathroom trash, Maggie noticed a crumpled real estate flyer among the used paper towels. She smoothed it out and froze. An artist's rendering of Riverfront Heights, luxury condos coming soon. Proposed location, the exact spot where the original Holloway's diner stood. That night, in her small rented apartment, Maggie made 2 calls. The first was to Frank, requesting an urgent investigation into Thomas Holloway's recent financial activity and any real estate developments near the diner. The second was to an old friend she hadn't contacted in years, Diane, from the health department. I'd like to anonymously report some concerns, she said, disguising her voice. And I need to know who's been signing off on Holloway's health inspections for the past 6 months. The answer chilled her. The once principled inspector now owned a luxury vacation home, well beyond what his salary could afford. Another piece clicked into place. The picture darkened. As she prepared for bed, Maggie's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw you take the flyer. Mind your business if you want to keep your job." They were watching her, but how closely? Day 10 began under a gloomy, rainy sky, matching Maggie's growing fatigue. Her body, once accustomed to boardrooms and garden club luncheons, now groaned under 14-hour shifts. At 68, her bones didn't stay silent anymore. Still, she found herself looking forward to seeing Sarah and Lucia, two small stars in the ever-darkening sky. When she arrived, the tension in the employee lounge was thick. Sarah sat curled up by the lockers, her face pale. "What happened?" Maggie asked. "Poochie is gone," Sarah whispered. "No call, no show. Her cousin works at the West Side location, said she was transferred there. But when he went to check, they said they've never heard of her." A block of ice settled in Maggie's chest. Everything lined up too perfectly with the timing of their conversation in the walk-in. "Has anyone asked Trevor?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Jason did. Trevor said she stole something. Said there's a video. Same story as with Jenny." Her eyes met Maggie's. In them, a silent question. "Can any of us survive this place?" Before Maggie could answer, Roxy stormed in like a gust of wind. "Schedule change, Margaret. You're on tables. Terrace section." "But it's raining," Maggie pointed out. "We've got umbrellas, and Trevor wants you visible today. We have a special guest." That special guest, Maggie discovered during the pre-shift meeting, was none other than Alderman Bradley, a city councilman with power over zoning approvals, including the high-rise condo project featured in the flyer. Everything suddenly clicked. Despite the dreary weather, the restaurant was unusually packed. Maggie's section was overloaded with customers, while other servers lingered with little to do. Every order hit a snag: kitchen delays, missing ingredients, register glitches requiring her to run back and forth for overrides. Trevor stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching her flounder with malicious amusement. When she approached for yet another approval code, Trevor glanced at his watch and said loudly, "Running a little slow today, Margaret? The system's fine. I guess, like gray hair, excuses grow with age." Laughter rippled through the service station. Maggie bit her lip and returned to her section, where 3 new tables had just been seated simultaneously. At exactly 12:30 p.m., Alderman Bradley arrived with 2 aides. Trevor seated them in Maggie's section and leaned in close, voice low and threatening. "These are VIPs. One mistake and you're done. Got it?" The alderman, a well-dressed man from Florida, with flashy cufflinks, didn't even look at Maggie when she took their drink orders. One aide snapped his fingers to call her back before she'd taken 3 steps. They treated her as though she were invisible. Or worse, a broken appliance long past its prime. Despite the disrespect, Maggie maintained the demeanor of someone desperate to keep her job. Beneath the composure, her recording pen captured every disdainful comment, every inappropriate touch when she set plates down. The breaking point came at dessert. 3 slices of apple pie, Richard's signature dish, made from his grandmother's recipe, were placed before them. After one bite, Alderman Bradley's face twisted in disgust. "What is this garbage?" he spat, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Tastes like it came from a gas station freezer." Maggie knew instantly the original recipe had been replaced with a cheap commercial knockoff. Her heart shattered. It was a disgraceful betrayal of Richard's legacy. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll bring you something else." "Don't bother," he snapped, pushing the plate away. "Trevor promised quality. This is laughable." Trevor appeared immediately, full of false apologies. "It's the new staff," he said, casting a pointed glance at Maggie. "These days it's hard to find people who care, especially from her generation." "Exactly," one of the aides chimed in. "They're too busy thinking about retirement to focus on work." "I assure you," Maggie began, "that pie is none of your concern." Trevor cut her off, his voice sharp. Why don't you go see to your other tables before you make a mistake you can't come back from? Maggie pressed her lips together and stepped away quietly. Behind her, Trevor turned back to his guests, his voice smooth as silk. Actually, he said, this incident illustrates exactly what I've been telling you. His voice dropped lower, but not low enough to escape Maggie's ears. Ears that had once sat through investor pitches, bank meetings, and the confessions of dozens of employees. The real value of this property, Trevor whispered, is in its prime riverfront location, not this outdated diner model. For the rest of the shift, Maggie felt like she was moving through a storm of humiliation. Every minor misstep, real or orchestrated, was turned into a public performance by Trevor. No one dared meet her gaze. Even Sarah, once a quiet supporter, kept her eyes on the floor. The atmosphere was thick with fear and silence, like a courtroom where the verdict was already decided. When the last customer left, Trevor blocked her path in the prep station. My office, now the office that once held Richard's warmth, family photos, community awards, and the familiar scent of oak, was now a sterile, glossy box, stripped of everything personal. You're done, Trevor said, bluntly. Today's performance gave me all I need to justify your termination. You did your job. Poorly enough. To prove we need restructuring. I've only been here 10 days, Maggie replied, still playing the role. I'm still learning your system. Drop the act. Trevor leaned forward. You were just a placeholder, a prop. I needed to push the reform narrative. He slid a check across the desk, short of her actual hours. Take it. Don't come back. Your termination file will cite multiple customer complaints. Outside, Roxy waited, gloating. Here's a tip, she said with mock cheer. Retail stores are always hiring greeters. Less chance of breaking anything. As Maggie gathered her few belongings, her eyes met Sarah's. The woman brushed past, slipping a folded napkin into her hand. In case you need a witness, she whispered. What they're doing isn't right. In her car, Maggie's body finally collapsed into exhaustion. After days of mental and physical punishment, her strength was nearly gone. But underneath the fatigue was something else. Clarity. A spark she hadn't felt since Richard's death. Her phone buzzed. Text from Frank. Documents received. Worse than expected. Call AA. Maggie gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her decision was made. The charade was over. It was time for Margaret Wilson to vanish, and for Maggie Holloway to return. Sunday morning, Richard's favorite time of the week, was when he believed people were at their best. Sundays when families show their truest selves, he'd often said, not just because of the meal, but the stillness before the week begins. Maggie studied herself in the mirror. Gone was the woman with dyed gray hair, thrift store glasses, and a hunched frame. Today she stood tall, her natural silver hair styled with purpose, wrapped in the deep navy suit Richard had always loved. Beside her, Frank stood ready, a thick portfolio of documents in hand. The evidence is indisputable, Frank said. Falsified invoices, diverted inventory, manipulated payroll records. And that's not even including the health violations Diane documented. Maggie nodded. What about Thomas? Denies everything, but the money trail is clear. An offshore account in both Tomas and Trevor's names. The funds trace back to Waterview Development, the company behind the Riverfront Heights project. And the phone used to threaten you? Bought with cash, taken straight from the restaurant's safe. I don't care if we can prove Trevor sent the message. Maggie cut in, her voice firm. They didn't just steal money. They stole this place's soul. At exactly 11:30 a.m. on Sunday peak brunch hour, a sleek black car pulled up to the front entrance. One vehicle carried Frank and the company's internal auditor. Another transported Diane from the health department and Officer Reynolds, whose father had been one of Richard's oldest friends. The familiar bell over the door jingled as Maggie stepped inside. For a moment, no one noticed. just a well-dressed woman arriving for lunch. But when Sarah, pouring coffee in the back corner, caught sight of her, her hand froze mid-air. "Miss Holloway." The whisper was enough to ripple through the room. Employees turned. Customers murmured. Maggie walked steadily to the center of the dining area, calm and commanding, with her entourage following behind, like living proof of everything that had been hidden. Trevor emerged from the office scowling, until his eyes locked on hers and panic washed over his face. "Maggie, what a surprise," he stammered, stepping forward for an embrace. Maggie stepped back. Her voice rang out, clear and strong. "You may know me as Margaret." Trevor went pale. Roxy appeared at his side, her confident smirk fading as realization dawned. "You're Maggie Holloway?" she asked. "Correct?" Maggie said, her gaze sweeping the room. "Co-founder and current majority owner of this establishment?" Silence. Then a slow clap began in the back. Another joined. Then the whole restaurant erupted in applause. Trevor grabbed her arm, attempting to steer her back toward the office. "This isn't the place for family matters." "Actually," Maggie said, removing his hand, "it's the perfect place. This diner was built on transparency, and it's time we returned to that." Frank stepped forward, pulling out the folder. "Trevor Holloway, under the moral turpitude clause in your management contract, your role is hereby terminated. Effective immediately." "This is ridiculous," Trevor snapped. "You don't have the authority." 3 weeks ago I might have believed that," Maggie replied, voice steady. "But after 10 days working under you, I've seen firsthand how you humiliate employees, endanger customers, falsify records, and systematically dismantle everything your uncle worked for." She turned to face the room. "Staff, customers, friends. Richard, my husband, believed in 3 core values: quality food, dignity for people, and service to the community. I returned to see whether that legacy was still alive." From her handbag, she pulled out a small recorder, and this is what I found. She pressed play. Trevor's voice echoed throughout the diner. "The property's real value isn't in the restaurant. Old-school diners are outdated." Trevor lunged at the recorder, desperate and exposed. But before he could reach it, Officer Reynolds stepped forward, planting himself firmly between them. "Illegal recording," Trevor barked, his voice shaking with anger and fear. "Not in this state," Frank responded coolly. "One-party consent is legal here. And Miss Holloway was a direct participant in every conversation recorded." Before he could say more, Roxy began backing toward the rear exit, but Diane stepped forward, cutting her off with an unflinching stare. "Miss Winters, we need to have a conversation about those falsified temperature logs and the repackaging of expired goods. Food safety violations carry civil and criminal penalties." As the weight of reality began to sink in, Trevor tried one last pivot. "Maggie, come on. Clearly there's been some misunderstanding. If I made changes, it was only to modernize things. Richard's methods were outdated." Maggie tilted her head slightly, her eyes no longer weary but filled with quiet power. The kind born from surviving, from rising again. "Maybe you're right," she said calmly. "Times have changed. That's why tomorrow the board will appoint new management." Her eyes swept the room and landed on Sarah, whose face froze in disbelief. "People who understand that sustainability comes from values, not shortcuts." Trevor's composure finally cracked. "You self-righteous, washed-up old." "Watch it," Officer Reynolds warned. "Given the financial fraud on record, your next words might be read back to you in an interview room." As Trevor and Roxy were escorted to the office to begin formal termination procedures, a fresh wave of applause erupted, spontaneous, unstoppable, swelling across the diner. Maggie moved from table to table, personally apologizing for any subpar experiences. She wasn't just the owner anymore. She was the spirit of the place, restored. In the kitchen, staff stood motionless, fear etched into every face. "Your jobs are safe," Maggie said, her voice as warm as the ovens that once baked their first pies. And your working conditions? About to improve. Very soon. She turned toward Victor, her expression sharp. With some exceptions. Emma, the young woman who had been mistreated, stepped forward, hands trembling. Miss Holloway, we didn't know, but now you do, Maggie said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. And tomorrow, we begin again. Together. The promise lit up the restaurant like morning sun pouring through windows. An elderly customer stepped forward, tears brimming in her eyes. Richard would be so proud, she whispered, squeezing Maggie's hand. He always said, you were the backbone of this place. For the first time since Richard's death, the ache in Maggie's chest softened. She hadn't just preserved his legacy. She had reclaimed her own. 3 months can change a life, or, in this case, a legacy. Maggie sat in the corner booth, the same spot where she and Richard had once sketched out their first business plan on a napkin 40 years ago. The restaurant looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The paint had been refreshed, matched exactly to the palette Richard had chosen. Booths had been reupholstered, but kept the same soft give that made people linger. Black and white photos lined the walls, chronicling the restaurant's journey. Among them, a hand-drawn portrait of Richard, commissioned from a local artist, stood out prominently. But the most profound change wasn't in the decor. It was in the energy, the laughter, the way staff looked at each other, the presence of values once thought forgotten. Good morning, Miss Holloway, Sarah greeted, now the general manager, approaching with a pot of coffee. There was a confidence in her stride Maggie hadn't seen before. Full house again, she said, 3rd Saturday in a row. Richard used to say, good word of mouth beats any ad campaign. Maggie smiled, accepting the coffee. What she didn't say was that the good word had gone far beyond expectations. The story of the owner undercover as a waitress had gone viral after a customer captured the confrontation with Trevor on video. Local news picked it up, then national outlets, and finally a business magazine ran it on their cover, Ethics in Family Business, and the woman who stepped into the shadows to bring back the light. Legal consequences followed swiftly. Trevor and Thomas were both indicted for financial fraud, built on the evidence Maggie had personally gathered. Roxy, seeking leniency, testified to further schemes. As for the alderman who once leaned toward approving the Riverfront Heights project, he quickly backpedaled and claimed he had been unaware of the deception. The project was scrapped. The rezoning application was unanimously rejected by the city council, marking their first 100% consensus vote in recent memory. Justice had prevailed. But for Maggie, the greatest reward wasn't legal. It was restoration of the space, of the trust. Miss Holloway, a shy voice pulled her out of her thoughts. It was Javier, the young busboy she had quietly looked out for during her undercover days. He handed her a soft, yellow envelope. I wanted to show you before my shift. It was a college acceptance letter, the scholarship program you reinstated. I got in. Maggie read the major, business administration, planning to follow the entrepreneurial path, she teased. Maybe one day I'll have a place of my own, he said. But don't worry, no competition for Holloways. This community has room for many dreamers, Maggie replied. Richard would be thrilled as Javier walked away. Emil, now head of maintenance for all 12 locations, approached. Health department inspection. Perfect score, he announced proudly. All 12 locations passed. From the kitchen, Maggie spotted Eduardo, the former head chef Trevor had fired, training a new line cook. Bringing him back hadn't been easy, but with an ownership stake and a commitment to shared values, he'd return. The corporate restructuring had been just as dramatic. Thomas, Richard's brother, once given a role out of family obligation rather than competence, was removed. In his place, Maggie installed a new financial team, bound by strict ethical codes and full transparency. And that wasn't all. For the first time, the board included frontline staff, servers, cooks, custodians, alongside business professionals. Decisions were no longer made in boardrooms alone, but reflected the realities of the kitchen floor. Real people, real stories. Lucia, the young woman who had vanished in silence after bravely speaking up, had also returned. Maggie had tracked her down through her cousin at the West Side location. Now, Lucia was in training to become an assistant manager, a well-earned promotion and a meaningful step forward. Her painful experience became the foundation for the company's first anti-harassment policy, with real enforcement, not just words on paper. "Miss Maggie!" a loud voice called across the room. It was Gloria Chen, the elderly regular who had comforted Maggie after the showdown with Trevor. She waved from her usual booth. "Come meet my grandson. He doesn't believe I know the famous undercover boss lady." Laughing, Maggie rose to greet them. These relationships, people like Gloria, the loyal customers who had become family, were the true heart of Richard's vision. Her phone buzzed. A message from Frank. Developer wants to partner with the Holloway brand. Still interested in expansion? Maggie smiled, slipping the phone back into her pocket. Business decisions could wait until tomorrow. Today was for savoring the victory. Not just of saving the diner, but of reclaiming her purpose. Before leaving, Maggie paused beneath Richard's portrait near the entrance. She gently straightened the frame, her gaze lingering on his familiar smile. "We did it, love," she whispered. "We not just saved it. I think we made it better." A young family walked through the door. Parents weary but hopeful, children wide-eyed as if stepping into something magical. Sarah welcomed them by name and led them to a table already set with high chairs. This warmth, this welcome, this sense of belonging was something no profit and loss sheet could measure. Trevor never understood that, but Maggie did, because she and Richard had built it from the heart. Returning to her booth, Maggie caught a moment that said it all, a teenage server helping an elderly man with his coat. No managers watching, no performance, just kindness, effortlessly rooted in the culture Maggie had brought back to life. Outside, dusk settled over the town. The sign glowed gently in the twilight. Holloway's Diner, where everyone matters. Its motto, restored to its rightful place. Some legacies aren't meant to be locked in display cases. They're meant to live, to breathe with their community, and to endure in the hearts of those who still believe kindness is power.